In an unnamed country, long before Gojo, the title of the honor one was held by a man named Hyoubu. And the only difference is that this guy is a genuine crash out. He is an incredibly powerful ESPer and he has a lot of hate in him for all the non-ESPer monkeys out there, so he has been deemed a major threat to be eliminated. However, he is such a menace to society that even though the military is throwing everything they've got him, Hyoubu is easily dealing with it and having fun in the process. After casually wiping out the entire unit, Hyoubu stops in front of the last soldier left alive, and since he's bored of fighting, he says he's going to surrender and let them take him to prison. At the same time, over in the ESPer prison, there's a huge commotion among the prisoners as they organize a mini fight club amongst themselves, and Andy is being forced to participate against his will. The guy he's fighting is way bigger than him, so he gets knocked around a lot, but eventually he lands a clean punch that knocks him out cold. That victory may have looked like it was dumb luck, but this is actually Andy's 7th victory in a row. So as much as he dislikes fighting, is actually pretty good at it, although all he gets for winning is a chocolate bar. Just then a helicopter flies overhead and everyone here knows that must mean something important is happening, so they all rush outside and watch Hyoubu brought into the prison. The prison warden is proud that he has finally captured the leader of the elusive ESPer organization P.A.N.D.R.A, but he is about to start gloating at Hyoubu's face. Hyoubu tells him to back his sweaty ass away from him if he doesn't want to get blown to pieces. However, the warden is confident that he will be fine, since even if Hyoubu's ESPer powers may be incredible, isn't going to be able to use them because of the anti-ESPer equipment they have installed. But just to be safe, here's a bunch of gunmen take aim at Hyoubu in case he tries anything. Andy sees this and he doesn't think it's right to point guns at an unarmed kid, even if he's got a body count higher than Balthazar and Gamda. He tries to calm the situation down, but he's still a prisoner here, so the guards just point their guns at him too. Hyoubu is impressed by the level of compassion and stupidity of Andy just displayed, so he approaches Andy, starts asking him questions. However, the warden doesn't like the fact that Hyoubu is ignoring him, so yells that Hyoubu isn't allowed to speak without his permission. Obviously, Hyoubu isn't going to let disrespect like that slide, so he prepares to raise his body count with the helicopter, but just as he's about to turn the helicopter into a destructive disc, the warden orders the guards to raise the output of the anti-ESPer system. Hyoubu may have been able to overcome its effects on normal output, but at maximum output his power is completely vanished. So the warden is back in control of the situation, although the prison's electricity bill is going to be crazy high this month. The warden orders the guards to take Hyoubu and lock him up in solitary confinement, and he also tells the guards to take Andy as well because he doesn't like his face. A couple of hours later, Andy is sitting in solitary confinement and his cell happened to be right next to Hyoubu's, so Hyoubu asks him why he stood up for him back in the courtyard. Andy says he hates ESPers like Hyoubu, but he hates people who abuse their authority even more, so he couldn't just sit back while guns were pointed at a high school kid. Hyoubu finds it ironic that Andy hates ESPers even though he's an ESPer staying ESPer prison. But it's not like Andy chose to be here, and this place is practically inescapable. The only time ESPers are allowed to leave the island is in the case of a severe injury when they are taken to the hospital, but even then it wouldn't be easy to get away. However, Hyoubu doesn't think getting out of here would be that hard, and in fact, as soon as he's done with his business in the prison, he says he's gonna be leaving. Meanwhile, the warden is taking a smoke break in his office because he low-key shit his pants when Hyoubu used his powers earlier, so to get back at him, he orders his subordinate to make sure Hyoubu's time in prison is a living hell, even if it means calling in the booty warrior. Later that day, Hyoubu and Andy are released from solitary confinement, so they head to the cafeteria for lunch. However, the lunchman blatantly puts some poison in Hyoubu's food and Hyoubu isn't blind, so he sees this happen. But rather than just throw the food away, he decides to give it to Andy instead. Well, long story short, Andy nearly dies as a result of the poison, and that counts as a severe injury. So the guards come to take him away to the special hospital, which is exactly what Hyoubu was hoping for. A little while later, Andy wakes up in a hospital room with Hyoubu standing over him, and at first he's mad at Hyoubu for giving him poison. But Hyoubu already gave him an antidote, so he won't die from the poison, plus, he also saved him from whatever these scientists were planning to do to his body. It would be easy enough to escape the prison from here, but Hyoubu still has some work to do. So he walks into the corridor and Andy follows him because he wants to get some answers as to what this place is. Neither of them have much info on it, but it looks like the prison has been pretending to take injured inmates to the hospital, but instead brings them down here where they get experimented on. Just then, Andy hears someone coming, so he runs for cover, and as the unsuspecting guard turns around the corner, Andy wastes no time and hits him with a combo that knocks the guard out, and then Andy steals his gun. The reason Andy is so good at fighting is because he was originally in the US Army, so he knows a thing or two about hand-to-hand combat. The two continue down the hallway until they come across a room with a strange plaque on the wall. It has the words Imperial Army written on it, but the sight of that thing reminds Hyoubu of a past he would rather leave forgotten, so he takes the gun and shoots the entire place up. Once he has calmed down a bit, he turns his attention to the giant cube in the middle of the room, and it looks like this is the reason Hyoubu came here in the first place, because he plans to free her. However, before he could do so, the warden shows up and he refuses to let Hyoubu leave with his valuable test subject, although he knows he has no chance of beating Hyoubu himself. So he's going to leave all the hard work to his big friend over here. This monster is being made up of all the brains and ESP cells from the prisoners who have been dissected in this lab, and it is completely obedient to the warden, so he orders it to attack Hyoubu. At first Hyoubu doesn't think the monstrosity is going to be much of a challenge for him, but when he sends his psychic wave at it, it easily counters the wave and charges at him, so Hyoubu is going to have to take this a little more seriously. While Hyoubu is dealing with the ESPer monster, there isn't really much Andy can do, so he starts running to grab the gun he brought so he can make himself useful. Meanwhile, Hyoubu is struggling to land a single hit on the monster since it has enhanced precognitive ability, so it can predict every move Hyoubu makes before he makes it. Eventually, Hyoubu gets slammed through the queue in the center of the room and lands right in front of the girl he came here to save. She looks worried, but Hyoubu tells her he has everything under control, although the warden thinks he's just trying to act cool in the face of death, because there's no way he could ever beat his level 7 ESPer monster. Hyoubu coughs at the fact that the warden thinks this thing has power equal to that of the level 7 ESPer, but all of a sudden Andy fires his gun at the monster, but that only makes it angry, so it fires some psychic blasts at Andy. Normally this would have killed any human, but Andy's eye began glowing and the blasts seem to have been cancelled out. Hyoubu notices this and makes him suspicious of Andy's origins, but for now he is more concerned about the girl's well-being. He asks her if she's alright and she says she feels fine, but then Hyoubu checks her sleeve and discovers a tube attached, and I'm not sure what it does, but Hyoubu definitely didn't like that. So he decides to go all out and finish things quickly. He reaches for the button on his collar and flips it upside down, unleashing his full power all in one go. In this form, Hyoubu is easily able to slam and drive the monster across the room and eventually pop it like a balloon on the ceiling. And as for the warden, I don't think he survived that. As the whole prison goes up in flames, Hyoubu teleports the girl and Andy outside where the P.A.N.D.R.A ship base is waiting to pick them up. He says he is interested in learning more about Andy, so he invites him to become an official member of P.A.N.D.R.A. And although Andy hesitates a bit, he eventually decides to join. But as the ship sets sail, Andy sneaks away from Hyoubu and shuffles through his eyes functions to make a report to his commanding officer. And just as he had intended, he has successfully infiltrated the criminal organization P.A.N.D.R.A. Andy may be a double agent, but that doesn't stop him from enjoying day-to-day life on the ship. So when he sees Momiji sunbathing and she asked him to help her with sunscreen, he's totally into it. But when he gets close to her, his powers make her head hurt, so she tells him to go away. And after that, Hyoubu teleports in and kicks him into the pool just because he wanted to mess with him. A little while later, Hyoubu introduces Andy to the rest of the crew, and to demonstrate his ability he has Momotaro fires some ESP blasts at him. As expected, the blasts disappear before they hit him, so Hyoubu tells everyone that Andy has the ability to negate the ESP abilities of others. Additionally, Yugiri can't read his mind, so neither telekinesis nor telepathy of any kind will work on Andy. However, since his power is always active, has the side effect of giving the ESPers around him severe headache if they get too close, and as a result, most people on the ship try to keep their distance from him. Although Maggie is at least kind enough to let him borrow a spare set of clothes from his closet after this morning's incident, Andy tries asking Maggie for some information about P.A.N.D.R.A since he doesn't know much about it. But Maggie doesn't trust him yet, so he tells Andy to sit tight until he receives further instructions and walks away. Later that day, Andy is back in the boiler room to have his scheduled report, and from what he has had to deal with so far, these P.A.N.D.R.A guys don't seem so scary after all. But then his commanding officer reminds him of the countless crimes and deaths P.A.N.D.R.A is responsible for. So Andy says he will continue the investigation as planned and report back once he has located the objective. At the same time, Maggie is giving a report on Andy since he thinks he is suspicious, but unfortunately he couldn't find any definitive proof that Andy is a traitor, and since telepathy doesn't work on him, they can't look through his mind either. Maggie is worried about letting Andy stay aboard their ship, but Hyoubu thinks he'll be fine and even suggests that they should bring Andy along on their next mission. Later on, the team heads out on their speedboat and arrives in the Sea of Venice. They're here to finalize a trade deal with the local ESPer mafia, but Hyoubu can tell that something's off, so he tells Maggie to go ahead and start dealing with it. Maggie understands and immediately transforms his hair into wings before flying away to locate the enemy that's spying on them. He has the power to control the carbon in his body down to the atomic level. So as soon as he locates the spy, he wastes no time and grabs him with his hair tentacles. However, the guy wasn't alone, so he sends a message telling the others to come help him, and Momiji teleports Yo there, but Andy has to walk on his own. When Andy finally arrives, he gets disoriented by the constant ringing in his ears, and it looks like it is being caused by Yo. His scream is apparently able to nullify all the sound in the area, so no one outside has any idea what's going on despite the massive fight that's going on. Eventually, they manage to knock all the spies out, and afterwards, they use telepathy to read their minds and figure out why they came after them. Their investigation reveals that the spies were sent by the Mardini family, the same one that they were meant to do a trade deal with later today, so this is an obvious case of betrayal. However, in spite of this, Hyoubu still wants to go ahead and meet with the Mardini leader as planned to find out what his intentions were. But as a rule, all traitors must be killed, so Hyoubu tells Andy to sit on a nearby rooftop and point a sniper at Mardini's head. And when he gives the signal, he wants Andy to take the shot. Andy is hesitant to actually do it, but if he wants to earn Hyoubu's trust, he can't let himself falter now. Over in the meeting room, Hyoubu sits across from Mardini, and Mardini compliments him for still looking the same as always even though it's been over 50 years since they first met. Hyoubu was born in the 1930s, but he is able to use his ESPer abilities to slow his aging process down so much that he never grows old. Mardini, on the other hand, has grown weaker with his advancing age, so had to make a deal with the police to sell out Hyoubu in exchange for his family's safety. Now that Hyoubu knows that Mardini truly is a traitor, he tells Andy to take the shot, but just as he is about to pull the trigger, Andy's nerves start getting to him, so he freezes up and Hyoubu ends up getting shot multiple times as a result. Only that's not what happens at all, because Hyoubu actually had all the men hypnotized into thinking they were all him, so they just shot themselves. The real Hyoubu then teleports up to Andy, and even though Andy couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger, that's pretty much what Hyoubu had expected to happen. He had a theory that Andy's negation powers would be enhanced if he was ever put under intense stress, which is why he stationed him here. Hyoubu goes up to Andy and says he has a gift for him, so he puts a limiter necklace around his neck to keep his negation powers in check from now on. He then teleports Andy down to the meeting room to show him that the Mardini that Hyoubu was meeting with was just a fake, and it was being controlled by the real Mardini, who was in the building across the street. Mardini is an incredibly powerful ESPer and was using his ability to shield his men from Hyoubu's psychic attacks, but once Mardini's powers were negated by Andy, it was really easy to take them down. Now all that's left to do is take care of the traitor himself. Hyoubu once again reaches for his collar and flips his limiter to go all out, completely obliterating Carlos Mardini as well as a good chunk of the city. Needless to say, a ton of people were killed in the incident, but in other news, Princess Sophie is hosting a peace conference to discuss options for peaceful coexistence with ESPers. And you already know Hyoubu had to make an appearance as soon as he found out. Two representatives from Japan, Minamoto and Sakaki, notice him there, and they already know Hyoubu must be up to no good, so they go over to confront him. Hyoubu is surprised to see a couple of members of Babel here, but he assures them that he isn't here to kill anyone today. He says he just wanted to see the faces of all the hypocrites who are pretending to care about ESPers' rights, and in fact, he just remembered he has something important to do, so he says he will be leaving now. Sakaki doesn't buy that story though, since he knows Hyoubu loves to cause chaos, so he grabs him by the shirt and demands that he tells them what he's up to. Minamoto tries to calm Sakaki down since Hyoubu has the power to blow this whole place up without lifting a finger, and Sakaki realizes this isn't a fight he can win, so he relents and lets Hyoubu go. Hyoubu doesn't seem upset by what Sakaki did, so the group walks towards the door, and with a snap from Hyoubu's fingers, the group disappears without causing any trouble, just like he said. Never mind, he's such a menace that he went and kidnapped the princess on his way out, and he even left graffiti clearly stating that he was the one behind it. It also says that he has no intention of harming the princess, but he has some demands they will have to fulfill if they want to get her back. As agents of Babel, Sakaki and Minamoto refuse to sit back and let Hyoubu get away with this, and luckily Sakaki managed to swipe a flash drive from Hyoubu when he grabbed him earlier, and he believes it may give them a clue as to where Hyoubu has hidden the princess. Minamoto is impressed with Sakiki's resourcefulness, but they need to hurry and analyze the flash drive so they can locate the princess as soon as possible. Little do they know, Hyoubu intentionally let Sakiki steal that flash drive because he's got a plan in mind. The princess wakes up a little while later, and even though she doesn't know where she is or who these people are, she seems pretty calm about the whole situation. Hyoubu explained to her that they are P.A.N.D.R.A and they kidnapped her, but he assures her that she will not be harmed in any way. The princess doesn't have much of a response, but she's just a chill dude who doesn't mind being kidnapped, so she simply asks Hyoubu if there's a reason behind her abduction. Hyoubu tells her that he honestly had no personal interest in the princess, but Yugiri asked him to kidnap her, and what kind of leader will he be if he wasn't willing to do that for her. The princess is pretty surprised since everyone here is a lot nicer than she had thought they would be, considering the fact that they are the world's most wanted criminal organization. She even makes an offer to work together with her since her goal is to create a world where ESPers are ostracized by the rest of the world. Although she can't say she agrees with all the war crimes they committed, the fact that she seems to genuinely care about ESPers brings up some old memories for Hyoubu, and he doesn't want to address that, so he simply walks away. Meanwhile, Sakiki is trying to analyze the data on the flash drive he swiped from Hyoubu, and it turns out that it was just a game, but even so Sakiki remains convinced that this game must hold a clue to the princess's whereabouts, so he's going to play it for as long as it takes. Meanwhile, the princess seems to have bonded with Yugiri over the past few minutes, so she was over to Hyoubu's room and asks if they'll let her go outside for a bit since Yugiri says she wants to go sightseeing with her. And he doesn't think that's a good idea since the only reason they kidnapped the princess in the first place was because Yugiri found out someone is trying to assassinate her. But since it's a request from Yugiri, Hyoubu is more than willing to fulfill her wish, and in fact, he says he has the perfect plan to both keep the princess safe and allow her to go outside undetected. Basically, he made every woman in the city look like the princess, and if everyone's the princess, then no one is. So now the real princess and Yugiri are able to go out together and blend into the crowd. The two were enjoying their time together, and towards the end of their date, Princess Sophie asks Yugiri if there's anywhere special she wants to go. Yugiri on one place in mind, so she led the princess to an old orphanage that the princess once supported. The princess finally understands why Yugiri is so attached to her, because a few years ago, Yugiri ended up in this orphanage for a couple days and Sophie was the first person to show her genuine kindness, so she wanted to get to spend time with her. While this was happening, Sakiki and Minamoto finally beat the game and cracked the code. So they take the flash drive and begin analyzing all the information that's on it, and it reveals who the culprit is, but they have to hurry if they want to stop him. Out by the orphanage, the Minister of Finance walks up to the princess and starts asking her to come with him since it's not safe to be around people from P.A.N.D.R.A, but before she can get too close to him, Sakiki comes running up from behind with backup and yells that the minister is the one who has been plotting to assassinate the princess. The minister is unhappy that the princess is using the national budget to fund projects that support ESPers, and he's willing to kill her to stop her decision from being executed. He fires the gun, but at the last second Andy jumps in front of the princess and blocks the bullet with his shoulder. So she's alright for now, but all the stress from the whole situation causes Yugiri's powers to start acting up. If her power goes out of control, it could be disastrous. But before anything bad happens, Hyoubu shows up and calms her down. He says he will handle the situation, so he simply crushes the minister's gun and leaves him to be arrested by the police. That pretty much solves everything, so he thanks Minamoto for all his help cracking the flash drive encryption, even if it was a big waste of time. Minamoto tries to stop Hyoubu, but with a snap of his fingers he teleports his team away. Back on the ship, Hyoubu is having a drink by the bar, so Andy decides to make some small talk and asks Hyoubu if he feels good about himself after saving a princess's life, but Hyoubu couldn't care less about the princess because he has already devoted himself fully to a queen. Talking about it has Hyoubu feeling all sentimental, so he decides to pay a visit to his queen over in Japan, or at least that was the plan, but it looks like his queen paid them visit first. 3 ESPer girls begin attacking the ship, and Minamoto is the one leading them on this mission to seize control of Hyoubu's ship. One of them, Kaoru, the girl Hyoubu hails is his queen, floats outside the ship, so Hyoubu is forced to go out and keep her busy. Once he's outside, he tells Kaoru that he's glad to see her again after so many years and he can't wait to see how much stronger she has grown. While Hyoubu and Kaoru are fighting outside, the other 2 girls make their way through the ship, taking out the crew members as they go. Andy and Yo will be cornered by them, and Yo is immediately teleported out by Aoi. But Andy turns off his limiters, so when she tries to teleport him, he negates her ability and is able to get close enough to restrain her. He asks why a little girl like her would be carrying out such a dangerous mission, but he forgets that there were 2 of them aboard the ship. So Shiho sneaks up and restrains him with a nanotube gun. She then tries to use telepathy to figure out if he knows where the control room is, but Andy's powers prevent her from reading his mind. After hearing their names, Andy finally figures out that these girls are the Japanese Special ESPer Forces, the children. He had thought the children was just a clever code name, but he never would have guessed that Japan would sink so low as to use kids in their military. After searching Andy, the girls find his limiter necklace, so they turn it on and now they are able to read his mind. The only problem is that he doesn't actually know where the control room is since he's new here, so they're going to have to keep searching. A little while later, the girls locate the control room and use Andy as a human shield to keep the others distracted while IOE teleports a special controlled ship into the ship's control system. Once that's done, they teleport out of there and the ship begins heading straight for the Babel forces near the coast. Hyoubu to the ship to hold his strategy meeting, and unfortunately, there's no way for Momiji get the control chip out of their system in time, so Hyoubu says he will go handle it. However, as he is about to teleport away, Andy grabs onto his hand because he wants to prove himself to Hyoubu so he can earn some trust. They arrive in the Babel ship, and since Andy isn't much used in a high-powered ESPer fight, so Hyoubu says he will handle the girls and tasks Andy with locating the remote control. Andy runs out onto the Babel ship's deck where he meets Babel's director, Tsubomi, and she's got the controller, so he's going to have to fight her for it. Unfortunately, she's a high-level ESPer, so Andy is pretty much stuck running for his life. However, he manages to catch her off guard by diving into the water, and once he's close enough, he grabs her hand. Andy was chosen to infiltrate P.A.N.D.R.A as an undercover agent, mainly because of his unique powers. He possesses the power to negate ESPers around him, but he also has the power to send a pulse into the body of anyone he touches, temporarily disabling their powers. This is exactly what he does to Tsubomi, and once she can't use her anymore, Andy is easily able to knock her out and destroy the controller. After that, Andy's job is done here, so he jumps off the ship and Hyoubu teleports him back to the catastrophe. Now that they have regained control, they plan to sail away, but the girls weren't going to let Hyoubu slip out of their grasp, so they all combine their powers and perform a special move to literally pull the catastrophe towards them. The only person strong enough to counter it is Hyoubu, so he tells everyone to get ready to escape once he overpowers his queen. Andy is meaning to ask for a while now, but he doesn't understand why Hyoubu keeps referring to Kaoru as his queen. The others explain that the end goal of their organization is to create a world where ESPers are free from oppression, and when the time comes, Hyoubu plans to make Kaoru the queen of their new world. But it is still too early for her to lead, so until that time comes, Hyoubu is going to have to do what he thinks is best. Hyoubu turns his limiter off and with his full power is able to single-handedly blast the girl away and free the ship from their hold, and once able to move again, they initiate high-level evasive maneuvers and sail the ship into the sky before disappearing into a portal. After that whole battle, the catastrophe was badly damaged, so they had to sneak into a repair shop in Tokyo to get it fixed. While the ship was being repaired, Hyoubu said he had some important matter to attend to, so he went off on his own and everyone else is doing their own thing as well. Andy got stuck taking Yugiri out to have some fun. And while he's not exactly happy about having to babysit, he loves seeing Yugiri happy, so he was along with it. As they go through town, he notices Yugiri staring at some people going into an amusement park, and it's clear that she wants to go in as well, but there's a very clear sign that says no ESPer are allowed inside, and Yugiri's so disappointed since that means she can't have fun in there. Fortunately, with Andy there, he just turns off his limiter and temporarily negates Yugiri's powers so the scanners aren't able to detect that she's an ESPer. Andy and Yugiri go on all sorts of rides together, and Yugiri is having the time of her life, but it looks like someone has been following them this entire time. At one point, Andy takes Yugiri to see a circus performance and he tells her to stay put while he goes to get them some drinks. But as he is walking away, he realizes someone is following him and confronts his stalker, who turns out to be Minamoto from Babel. Minamoto tells Andy that he's not here to fight, rather he wants to talk since he knows Andy is secretly an US agent. This gets Andy's attention, but he denies Minamoto's claim and asks what evidence led him to make such an accusation. Minamoto says that when they fought he recognized Andy's fighting style as the same one taught in the US military, and walled out alone may not be enough to prove that Andy is a double agent. Tsubomi is convinced, so if he doesn't agree to help them with what they are planning, she threatens to snitch on Andy, and if there's one thing Hyoubu hates most in life, it's traitors. During the war 50 years ago, every major military in the world invested a lot of resources into ESPer soldiers, and Hyoubu was one of the best out there. But towards the end of the war, Hyoubu's commanding officer betrayed and tried to kill him, so as revenge Hyoubu killed every single military official involved, as well as a bunch of the original members of Babel. While Andy was busy talking to Minamoto and Tsubomi, the show Yugiri was watching ends and everyone starts leaving, but that's when she notices a young boy all by himself. The boy apparently got lost and Yugiri wants to help him, so she takes his hand and uses her powers to scan the crowd for his parents. She eventually finds the boy's parents, and the parents are really thankful for her help, but as soon as the boy mentions how Yugiri used telepathy to find them, the parents realize she must be an ESPer and immediately run off to go call security. Once word gets out that there's an ESPer in the park, everyone begins looking at Yugiri with disdain, which puts her under a lot of stress. So when security shows up and tries to detain her, and her powers go out of control and turn the entire amusement park into a horror show, Andy realizes something is wrong, so he cuts his meeting with Minamoto short and runs to go check on Yugiri. He knows Yugiri's powers are out of control, so Andy turns his limiter off and runs towards her so he can negate her abilities and make things go back to normal. Andy tells Yugiri that everything is going to be alright, but with the scene they just cause everyone now knows they are ESPers and all eyes are on them, so it's going to be hard to get out of here. Luckily, the others notice when Yugiri's powers went out of control, so they soon show up and Momiji teleports them all back to the ship. Once back on the ship, Andy notices is a bunch of party decorations all over the place, but before he can figure out whose party this is, the guest of honor shows up. Once Hyoubu arrives, the party begins and everyone starts giving him gifts they have prepared in advance, but Andy's got nothing since he didn't know today was Hyoubu's birthday to begin with. Everyone gives him a hard time for it, but since he's still new here, they tell him he's just going to have to make up for it with a great present next year. However, Hyoubu hasn't told anyone about it, but his body is deteriorating rapidly, so at this rate he's not going to survive that long, which is why he is so focused on completing his mission. After Hyoubu's partying, the ship sets sail again and the spatial cloaking comes back online, so Babel shouldn't be able to locate them anytime soon. Hyoubu tells the crew that he has one more mission he wants to complete before leave Japan. They receive intel that a new ECM prototype is in production, and it is set to be transported to Japan soon, so they need to intercept and steal it. Simply blowing it up would be a lot easier, but there's a lot of valuable information they could acquire from analyzing it, so they have to take special care not to accidentally destroy it during their mission. But until then, the group is free to, so Yo asks Andy to play a couple games of pool with him. But Andy doesn't want to since Yo is really difficult to play with. And by difficult, I mean he's gonna cheat with his powers any chance he gets, so Andy never stood a chance. Just then, Yugiri walks into the bar looking for Hyoubu since she had a bad dream. But since Hyoubu isn't here, she asks Andy to come read her a bedtime story. Andy is surprised that she wants him to do it, but he agrees and follows her to her room to read her story. Meanwhile, Hyoubu is in the throne that he prepared for Kaoru, and even if he won't live long enough to see it, he will make sure he achieves his goals and creates a world for ESPers where she can rule as queen. A little while later, Yugiri has fallen asleep, so Andy heads to the library to return the book, but while he's there he notices Hyoubu walking, so he decides to eavesdrop. Hyoubu walks over to a desk and pulls out an old book before using his powers to animate a clone and old friend Utsumi. Utsumi is shocked to see Hyoubu again and wonders what's going on. But when he sees that blood-stained book in Hyoubu's hand, he realizes he must have died, so Hyoubu is merely giving a form to his thoughts. He can accept the fact that he's a ghost now, but he still wants to know what happened to Tsubomi and the others from their team. Hyoubu dodges the question and instead tells Utsumi that he has a request to ask of him. He hands him a blueprint that explains that this ship's mechanisms, including the flight and cloaking ability, are all operated by the preserved brain of one of their fallen comrades, Ego, and aside from Hyoubu, Utsumi is the only other person who Ego would listen to, so he wants Utsumi to promise that he will take over for him when he's not around anymore. But before he dies, he swears that he will eradicate every non-ESPer on Earth. Just then Utsumi senses someone watching them, so he tries to use some paper to attack the spy, but when he goes to check he finds nothing but a necklace on the ground. However, Hyoubu knows Andy was here. After hearing that Hyoubu plans to kill all regular humans, Andy makes his mind up and decides that he must stop Hyoubu at all costs, so he contacts HQ and tells them that he will be carrying out his mission. He will leak info to Babel, and while they keep the others distracted, Andy will complete the primary objective of stealing Ego. The next day, everyone heads out on the mission to steal the ECM, but when they intercept the convoy they are ambushed by Minamoto and a ton of agents from Babel. The timing of this is way too convenient, so Hyoubu realizes something is wrong and tells Maggie to handle things here while he goes back to the catastrophe. However, before he could reach the ship, he gets confronted by Kaoru. She doesn't hate Hyoubu and understands that he thinks he is doing what's best for ESPers all around the world, but she can't let him continue on his current path, so she's going to have to stop him by force. Hyoubu's body won't last much longer, so he decides to get this over as quickly as possible and immediately turns his limiter off. He then proceeds to drag Kaoru for several buildings with his powers until she can't move anymore before gently setting her down on the roof and teleporting away. Meanwhile, Andy has made his way back to the catastrophe and broken into the room where Ego is kept. He reports back to headquarters that he is about to obtain Ego, so his commander tells him a transport team will be sent to pick it up shortly. But before he cuts the call, Andy tells his commander that the ESPers aboard the ship are not dangerous people, so there's no need to use deadly force against them. Andy then approached Ego, is about to disable it, but before he can do anything, Hyoubu teleports in behind him. Hyoubu had his suspicions about Andy early on, but now that Andy has decided to betray him, Hyoubu declares that he will kill him. We got a look into Hyoubu's past as he was a little boy arriving in Japan for the first time as he disembarked a ship with his guardian. A little girl walks up to the man and hugs him because she has missed her father a lot. She also notices Hyoubu standing there, so her father introduces him as the son of the old friend and says Hyoubu will be living with them from now on. The girl was excited to have a new little brother, so she introduces herself to him as Tsubomi, and to Hyoubu's surprise she was an ESPer just like him. Hyoubu heard a lot of stories about how his father and Tsubomi's father researched ESP together and traveled the world to find ESPers. But that's very different from the way his father treated him while he was still alive. He was constant yell at Hyoubu for daring to use powers, so Hyoubu was forced to keep his ESPer's powers hidden all the time, but that doesn't seem to be the case here since Tsubomi is allowed to use her powers in any way she wants. She sees Hyoubu writing in his diary and she feels like messing with him, so she decides to snatch it to see what he's writing about. But that diary is meant to be private, so Hyoubu uses his powers to take it back from her. Tsubomi is shocked that Hyoubu's telekinesis is strong enough to overpower hers, but she's still a lot bigger than him, so she decides to pin him to the ground until he gives up. However, looks like they got some visitors, so Tsubomi stops playing and greeted Captain Eiji. Eiji is here with Tsubomi's father and Utsumi, and he wants to talk to Hyoubu and Tsubomi about the possibility of them joining the military and using his power for good. This caught Hyoubu's attention since he has always wanted to be a hero, but Tsubomi is convinced that Eiji is just trying to weaponize ESPers for the sake of war. So she grabs Hyoubu's hand and drags him off because she doesn't think it's a good idea to listen to Eiji. But Utsumi is convinced that Hyoubu and Tsubomi will reject Eiji's offer since Hyoubu's father raised him to keep his powers hidden, and Tsubomi dislikes the idea of war, but on the contrary, Eiji is sure they will eventually join his unit because in a world where ESPers are feared simply for existing, they will have nowhere else to go. That night, Hyoubu and Tsubomi are deep in thought over Eiji's proposal, and while Hyoubu wants to follow his father's wish of him living a normal life, he also wants to use his powers for the greater good. And if during Eiji will allow him to do that, then maybe he should consider it. Meanwhile, Tsubomi recalls how Hyoubu managed to overpower her with his psychic ability and she can't stand it. Until now she was told she possessed the strongest psychic abilities in the world. But if she isn't the strongest anymore, then she isn't going to be special, so she refuses to let Hyoubu surpass her. So the next day, both Hyoubu and Tsubomi packed their bags and told Eiji they were ready to join his ESPer unit. A year later, the ESPer unit makes their first appearance and public opinion of them seems to be pretty good, but Tsubomi doesn't like the fact that their ad campaign still refers to them as monsters. She asks Hyoubu what he thinks about it, but he left the group a while ago because he had small tasks to do. Hyoubu had gone to a watch repair store to get his pocket watch repaired as it was a memento from his father and it's very important to him, but as he is leaving the repair shop he bumps into a policeman and the officer assumes a kid like Hyoubu could possibly have such nice things, so he starts questioning him. Hyoubu tries to explain himself, but the officer won't let him say anything, so he doesn't know what to do. Just then, Tsubomi shows up and she's rightfully pissed that an officer would hassle a young boy for no reason, so she gets into an argument with him. However, she is a bit of a hot temper, so she ends up side-kicking the officer so hard that he gets sent flying. That may have been a little overkill, but the real problem here is that she kicked the policeman straight into a naval officer who was nearby, which knocked him out and will likely lead to a major reprimand. As a result, the entire ESPer unit ends up being put on house arrest, and Tsubomi feels really bad for getting everyone in trouble with her actions, but they tell her it's fine since it's not entirely her fault. The rest of the military hates their unorthodox ESPer unit, so they've been looking for ways to crush them for a long time, and this incident just gave them a good excuse to impose sanctions. To clear this whole thing up, AG goes to a board meeting with all the other military captains, and he asserts that his ESPer unit is incredibly valuable to the military. So to prove it, he proposed a competition between the most advanced military technology they've got in his ESPers. The higher-ups agreed to the duels, so AG relays this information to the team and Tsubomi volunteers to represent them since she is the reason all this started, but AG says he wants Hyoubu to do it instead. Hyoubu begins training for the air duel by practicing his evasive maneuvers, but he's still not very good at it yet, so gets shot quite a bit. After a long day of training, Hyoubu heads to the bath to relax a little and let his body heal. But just then, Tsubomi comes in and Hyoubu starts freaking out from seeing her in a bath towel. Tsubomi tells him there's nothing to be embarrassed about since they are siblings, adopter siblings, but siblings nonetheless, so Hyoubu calms down and puts his towel on so the two of them can talk. Up until Hyoubu showed up, Tsubomi had been considered the strongest, and while she never hated him for it, she's been trying to grow stronger to surpass him. However, more than anything, she wants to make sure that she cares about her safe, so she asks Hyoubu to make sure that no matter who the enemy is, he will always win. The day of the duel finally arrives, and as the newly developed plane is heading for the designated battlefield, Tsubomi and one of the other ESPers teleport onto the plane's wings. If this were an actual battle, they could just throw a frag grenade in the cockpit. And right now, that's not what this duel is about, so Tsubomi is just here to warn him that Hyoubu isn't going to be easy bit. However, Tsubomi then notices that the pilot happens to be the same naval officer she accidentally knocked out. So she starts apologizing to him for the incident, but he ignores her apology and shakes her off a plane. The officer eventually spots Hyoubu, so he engages in dogfight. But it's much harder to hit Hyoubu than he initially anticipated since Hyoubu is able to change his direction instantly. However, even if he has the advantage in maneuverability, this plane still flies at 500 km per hour, so Hyoubu isn't going to be able to outrun it for long, and in terms of firepower, all that Hyoubu has is a rifle loaded with practice bullets, but he has a plan to win anyway. He flies ahead of the plane, and while the officer is flying straight towards him, he turns and fires a bullet straight at the cockpit. If that were a real bullet, the officer would be dead right now, so it's clear that Hyoubu is the winner of the duel. But when Hyoubu calls in to tell AG that he won, he's told that there's an emergency, so he needs to switch to live ammunition and prepare for active combat. There's an unidentified US submarine in their waters, but when they try to establish communications, a sub opened fire on them, so it is clearly hostile. The ESPer unit asks if they should attack it, but AG doesn't think that's a good idea since at this point, Japan's relationship with the US is pretty tense. Attacking the sub might spark an all-out war, so he tells them to just leave it alone. Then the sub starts firing torpedoes, so it's becoming hard to ignore them. The torpedoes don't seem to be aimed at any Japanese forces, but rather a group of dolphins instead, which seems strange, and even stranger is the fact that the dolphins can use telepathy. It looks like the dolphins were part of a failed experiment that the US wants to get rid of, and one of the dolphins ends up getting hit and killed by the torpedo. Hyoubu and the others don't want to let another one die, so they begin working together to stop the two torpedoes that were launched. They teleport grenades into the water and it successfully blows one of the torpedoes up, but the other one managed to get through, so Hyoubu is forced to fly in to deal with it himself. I'm still wondering why the dolphins don't at least try to turn out of the way, but hey, I'm not a dolphin so I wouldn't know. Hyoubu first takes out the propellers on the torpedo, and then just before it explodes, he uses his powers to form a force field to block the shockwave. After the final torpedo was blocked, the US sub backs off and leaves Japanese waters, so Hyoubu and the others return to base. It looks like Hyoubu and the others finally prove their usefulness to the military, so general perception of ESPers was really good. But that all went to shit when a couple of years later, the US decided to drop a really big kaboom on Hiroshima. War was practically over in one night, so AG called Hyoubu in to have a discussion. Remember that dolphin that dies to the torpedo? Well, AG had its brain preserved, and it possesses incredible precognitive ability, so he was able to see into the future. And what it foresaw is that Hyoubu will leave an army of ESPers to destroy the world, so AG points a gun at Hyoubu. AG doesn't really care about an ESPer uprising. What he cares about is the fact that Hyoubu is prophesied to hold all the power instead of him, and he refuses to let anyone else hold such powers, so he shoots Hyoubu in the head. At this moment, Hyoubu had barely processed the fact that one of the people he trusted the most would try to kill him. So his mind begins racing faster than it ever had before, so much so that he becomes racist and decides that all non-ESPer humans are not worth living. He then uses his power to revive himself and murder AG on the spot before going on a murderous rampage for revenge. That brings us back to the present as Hyoubu begins attacking Andy, and even if Andy is able to nullify all ESP around his body, he can still be injured by having stuff thrown at him. So that's what Hyoubu intends to do, but while Andy is running around the room to dodge Hyoubu's attack, he manages to get his hands on Ego and nullifies his powers, causing the ship's cloaking mechanism to shut down. Now the US military sensors are able to locate it and immediately begin close in on the ship. They make an announcement saying they will not harm any of the ship's occupants if they hand over Ego peacefully, but 3 seconds later the commander calls and a drone strike on the ship. Andy didn't expect this to happen since he was told the military would handle this peacefully and tries to tell Hyoubu this wasn't what he wanted to happen, but Hyoubu refuses to listen and just teleported outside to deal with the drone bombing. While Hyoubu is busy, the US sends 2 units down to seize control of the ship, and once they are on board they go straight for all the ESPer kids. One of the older kids tries to protect the other, so she uses her modern manipulation to take out 2 of the soldiers and tells the kids to run. More soldiers show up, but she is prepared to hold them off for as long as it takes. However, but she tries to use her powers, she realizes she can't. These soldiers can prepare with ECM machines to dynam powers of any problematic ESPers they ran into, and now that she can't use her powers anymore, they give her a taste of American freedom. Andy's commanding officer comes into the ship personally, and while he's there he runs into Yugiri and has his soldiers knock her out with the ECM machine. But when Andy finds out about it, he is livid and asks the director why he's treating Yugiri like this. Andy specifically asked him to treat the ESPer children with care, and the director definitely remembers that promise. But he's just choosing to ignore it. He believes that all ESPers are monsters that need supervision, so he will be taking Yugiri into custody for likely experimentation. Until now, Andy may not agree with everything P.A.N.D.R.A has done, but he has spent enough time with Yugiri and knows that she's a monster, so he picks up a gun and says he won't let the director take her. The director is disappointed that Andy would turn against him, but he just sees it as a slight inconvenience and says he will have to erase all evidence of Andy's involvement with his agency and points a gun at him. Andy should probably have taken the first shot when he had the chance, because the director doesn't even hesitate before shooting Andy in the chest and leading him to die. Meanwhile, Hyoubu has just finished dealing with the attack drones, and he's about to go after the US man attack ship. But then he realizes that the US is launching heavy artillery fire of the catastrophe, and he starts freaking out because everything he has worked for is being burnt to the ground. However, Maggie and the others remind him that they, as well as all the ESPer children left on this ship, are counting on him, so Hyoubu locks in and tells them to evacuate while he handles artillery. He then flies into the air to unleash his full power, and as he does so his body begins to fail him. But he doesn't have time to worry about his well-being, so he gives everything he has to stop the US military's bombardment so everyone can escape. Meanwhile, back in the ship, it looks like Andy managed to survive the shot to the heart thanks to the limiter Hyoubu gave him, and he sees Hyoubu lose consciousness from all his exertion, and without Hyoubu blocking the artillery, the ship is doomed. So just as the ship is about to be blown up, Andy drives into the water after Hyoubu to save him. As Hyoubu gets the water, he starts wonder if he really made the right choice in doing what he did. But just as he is about to accept his fate and drown, Andy grabs his hand and pulls him back up to the surface. Although with the ship totally destroyed, he has no way of getting Hyoubu to safety. Luckily, Tsubomi soon shows up and it looks like she's here to help. After the incident, Minamoto heads to a meeting with the US representatives to discuss what they will do moving forward. Basically, the US wants Babel to pretend that the whole thing never happened and sweep it under the rug. And as the head of Babel, Tsubomi had predicted this, so she pre-recorded a message telling the US representatives that she will keep their secret for now, but in exchange, she wants them to avoid interfering Babel's matters. Meanwhile, Tsubomi is back in her father's old estate, since this is the only place she could bring Hyoubu without arousing suspicion, and after a bit of treatment, Hyoubu regains consciousness for the time being. The first thing he does now that he's awake is ask Tsubomi if Andy is in the building as well, and Tsubomi says she doesn't know where Andy is right now. But that was a straight line, because as they speak, Andy is in a lab across town being loaded into a machine to suppress his negation power so IOE can use her powers to take out the chip the US is installing him. Now that the ship is out, Andy can't be tracked anymore, so he and the girls head over to the manor to see Hyoubu. Hyoubu is glad Kaoru came to visit him, but he will talk to her later because he needs to have a very important talk with Andy. Everyone leaves the room to give Hyoubu and Andy some privacy, and as much as Hyoubu wants to pop Andy's head for being a traitor, there's something else he wants to ask him. When the catastrophe was being attacked, Hyoubu recognized the voice of the person, so he asks Andy if he knows who that person is. Andy tells him he has only ever met the director in person, and that was when he was being recruited into the ESPer unit. But something was strange about the guy since he was Japanese, just like Hyoubu had a scar running across his entire chest. Almost as if someone had burst his intestines with ESP. Hyoubu had his suspicions before, but after hearing Andy give that description, he's sure that Andy's former director is the same person who betrayed him in the last war. He's incredibly angry to learn this, but all the stress causes his heart to give out, so he falls unconscious. Everyone rushes in to check on him, and after running some tests, Sakaki figures out why Hyoubu is in such terrible condition. Hyoubu was able to maintain his youthful appearance despite pushing 50 by controlling his body's T-cells. But those T-cells are starting to degenerate, so before long, Hyoubu is going to die. Kaoru asks if there's any way for them to save Hyoubu because she doesn't want to let him die, and Sakaki tells him there's something he can try, but he can't guarantee that it will work. Hyoubu wakes up a little while later and finds he's getting a blood transfusion from Kaoru in an attempt to replenish his T-cells. She knows Hyoubu hates non-ESPer, but she's sure that if they work together they'll be able to build a better world where ESPers and non-ESPer can get along. Hyoubu sees genuine hope in Kaoru's eyes, and that's one of the reasons he devoted himself to making her queen. But it's already too late for him to be hopeful. The only path left is that of revenge. So that night, while everyone is asleep, Hyoubu leaves the manor and to finally settle things with Eiji, but as he is leaving, Andy pulls up next to him in a car and says he's coming along. He knows Hyoubu still doesn't trust him, but Andy at least wants to help save Yugiri to make up for what he did a little, so Hyoubu gets in the car and the two head off together. Sometime later, Andy's former recruiter walks into his apartment and finds Hyoubu sitting in a chair. He is shocked because Hyoubu is supposed to be dead, but before he has the time to react, Andy shows up behind him and points a gun to his head. The recruiter is even more surprised now that he knows he doesn't stand a chance in a fight against these two, so instead of trying to win, he knocks the gun out of Andy's hand and tries to shoot himself in the head so they can't get any information from him. Fortunately, Hyoubu uses his powers to stop the bullet mid-air and says he won't let him die so easily. At least not until Yugiri is safe. Since the recruiter has no other choice, he leads Andy and Hyoubu to the facility where Yugiri was sent after she was captured. Andy isn't familiar with this facility, so the recruiter explains that the mission of the USEI is to control ESPers like trained dogs, which is why they developed a specialized biological control collar. In fact, the one they refer to as Yugiri was an experimental ESPer artificially cloned for the purpose of this project, but due careless supervision she managed to escape. They are then brought to a room, and after scanning the device with his powers, Hyoubu finds out that they performed some sort of brainwashing on Yugiri after she was sent here, but she hasn't been here for a while, meaning the recruiter only brought them here to lure them into a trap. Just then, a message is sent over the cams and Hyoubu recognizes it as the voice of Eiji, so he asks him what he is planning. Eiji doesn't say much, but he displays an image of the future Ego saw, and it shows a world where ESPers rebel against the non-ESPers, and they are being led by none other than Kaoru. Eiji believes ESPers should be subservient to non-ESPers, so he's going to do everything in his power to stop that future from happening. And naturally, that means he will have to dispose of Kaoru as well. Hyoubu refuses to let that happen, and Eiji dares him to try and stop it, but in the next moment a dozen security drones show up to neutralize them. The recruiter must really be committed to the job, since he grabs Hyoubu and orders the drones to shoot while he's still in the line of fire. Hyoubu uses his powers to save himself, but the recruiter, he's dead and he's still got a smile on his face. Now Andy and Hyoubu are surrounded and need to get out of here, but Hyubu's powers are weakened due to his body's current condition, so he can't teleport them out. Andy tells Hyoubu to get out of here while he holds security off, and he apologizes for lying to Hyoubu and betraying his trust. But Hyoubu still considers Andy a comrade, so he refuses to leave him behind, although the situation still isn't looking very good, so they need to figure a way out of this together. Suddenly, the members of P.A.N.D.R.A bust in through the roof and rush to take out the guards in the room. And after they get Hyoubu and Andy out of there, they bring them onto their new submarine base. It took them a while to find Hyoubu after the incident, but more importantly, Yo confronts Andy and asks him what his intentions are after betraying them. Andy knows nothing he says will make up for what he did, but he wants to atone for his mistake and rescue Yugiri more than anything. Yo accepts Andy's answer, but Sucker punches him in the face, wants his payback for his betrayal. Now they're even, so they need to focus on locating Yugiri before AG can accomplish his goal. They check the news and see a report of the recently elected mayor of New York, who is a major advocate for ESPer and non-ESPers coexistence. And they figure out that AG must be planning to use Yugiri to assassinate the mayor in order to show even more distrust for ESPers within society. So they need to hurry over there and stop it. The mayor is currently giving his inaugural speech, and just as Yugiri is about to go through with AG's plan and assassinate the mayor, Andy steps in front of him and negates the blast before getting the mayor to safety. However, AG still has control over Yugiri, so he orders her to use her powers to kill Andy. Yugiri does as she is told and extends a domain to hypnotize everyone within it, so they attack Andy. Meanwhile, Hyoubu finds one of Yugiri's illusion duplicates in the city, and she tries using her hypnosis on him as well, but Hyoubu blocks it, or at least he thought he did, but it looks like Yugiri's hypnosis took effect because he is faced with an illusory clone of himself. Hyoubu's battle with himself leads him down a rabbit hole of everything that has ever gone wrong in his life, all his comrades who died because he couldn't save them. The memory of him being betrayed and killed by AG and his younger brother's self condemning him for the monster he has become. Hyoubu is well aware that this is only an illusion, but in order to overcome it, he is forced to unleash his full power, even though he knows it will likely kill him. He turns his limiter off and his energy dispels Yugiri's illusions, but if he wants to save her, he has to go into her head to undo the brainwashing. Hyoubu sees the Yugiri's past as a test subject and how the scientists in charge of her were planning to eliminate her for being too powerful, so she was forced to defend herself with her powers and ended up killing them. From there, Yugiri moved from place to place, but she was always scared that her powers would end up hurting someone. So she avoided forming bonds with people, but then she met Hyoubu and showed her that she didn't need to be scared of her powers. Hyoubu finally snaps Yugiri out of the brainwashing by using his full power. Here was more than his body could handle. So is his final act. He erases the biochip in Yugiri's neck, but then his powers go out of control. All the strain on his body has made him unstable, so any minute now his body could explode, and Hyoubu already accepted his fate. He manages to save Yugiri and prevent AG's plan, so even if this is the end for him, at least he can die satisfied. However, Andy refuses to let him die because over the time he has known Hyoubu, he has come to learn that there are a lot of decent ESPers out there. So he wants to see what kind of world he will create, so he pushes through Hyoubu's psychic waves and grabs onto his shoulders before using every bit of his negation powers to suppress Hyoubu's powers so he can survive, but it takes a toll on Andy, so he passes out shortly after. The following day, after AG's assassination plot was revealed, everyone involved in the operation was arrested and AG is the only one who managed to get away. But even if he escaped the police, he can't escape Hyoubu. He tells Hyoubu just kill him already because even if he dies he knows his memory will always continue to haunt Hyoubu. However, Hyoubu says he won't be killing AG solely because Kaoru wouldn't approve of him doing that, so instead, he decides to give AG severe dementia so he lives up the rest of his life as a shell of his former self. Back at P.A.N.D.R.A's temporary base, Hyoubu runs into Andy as he is getting ready to leave on his journey. He tells Andy that he doesn't have to leave since he is more than happy to welcome him back into P.A.N.D.R.A, and while Andy appreciates the gesture and would love to see the world Hyoubu creates firsthand, he also feels like he should follow his own path. So he wants to return the limiter necklace Hyoubu gave him. However, Hyoubu tells him to keep it since whether Andy chooses to stay in here or not, he will still always be a member of P.A.N.D.R.A as far as Hyoubu is concerned. Hyoubu and Andy then go their separate ways, but they continue moving forward in hopes of a better future. Thanks for watching. Want more anime recaps? Subscribe the channels and turn on notification bell.